When and where did you born?
Born in Chicago, Illinois, 1949, March 8th. Yes.
Alors, how did you grow up and why did you choose the guitar as like instrument?
Now, how did I grow up? I grew up in a very strict family. Two families, actually. The Mayfield family and my family. And I chose guitar because of a problem I was having, actually. I was very mannish. And I chose the guitar to keep me company in a lonely bedroom, which was for punishment, My parents would always say, you go to your room. And I spent a lot of time in the room, so I chose a guitar to play.
Okay.
Just to pass the time,
Alors, the family, you are the cousin Curtis Mayfield?
I am the half-brother of Curtis Mayfield.
Okay.
We, both families stayed together, actually. It was the Mayfield family and the Washington family. And because Dad married twice, and had 6 kids on each side of the family. And I grew up young, between the age of 8 and between the age of 7 and 9 years old. I lived with my grandmother, which we all did, meaning my brothers and sisters and I. Stayed with our grandmother for a very short time, but we lived not too far apart, 6 or 7 blocks apart. We lived, and so we were constantly in touch with each other. And this is when I realized music, which was around the age of 8 years old, that music existed through watching Curtis rehearse with the Rooster Tails. Which was the first group he was with. Yes.
Okay. Alors, is there aussi the family with comment il s'appelle? Marvin Gaye? No. You have the not family and the refer.
No.
No, c'est just a cousin, the brother Curtis Mayfield.
Yes.
Okay. Alors, how did you begin your first show in your career on the club? And
my first show.
Yeah.
My first show actually began in grammar school. Did they call it a jamboree? And I did my first performance at 8 years old, which I couldn't play guitar, but I could perform. So I performed on stage. I was trying to think of, I grew up in Chicago on south and west side, but during this particular time that you're speaking of, I was on the west side of Chicago. And I also grew up with a young man named Chris. We were both in the same grade. We were both the same age. And we both performed in 4th grade at this particular jamboree. And he went on to become one of the writers for Chaka Khan, music-wise, And I went on to become DC Bellamy, the great, But we both attended the same school in Chicago, and we were basically the same age, and and we kind of grew up together, even though we didn't live close to each other, but because we attended the same school and was in the same room, we basically did the show together. He sung, and he had a beautiful voice.
Okay.
He could really, at a young age, he was great. And I was more of a performer, meaning I was an entertainer. So I could entertain with the guitar, and of course one of my favorite artists was Elvis Presley. So I was doing a rendition of Elvis Presley, and he was doing a rendition of Harry Belafonte, on our first show,
Okay.
And this was in the 50s. This was, let me see, 49, 51, 52, between 1957 and 1958.
Ah, okay.
Yes.
Alors, en Chicago, how did you been the Chicago scene? Because there are there are buddy guys, there are the
Yes.
many musicians. And for you,
Okay. I started the Chicago scene actually by accident, or should I say by fate.
okay.
I used to attend a musician's. I used to acquire the services of a musician who blew trumpet for the Red Saunders Orchestra. Now, the Red Saunders Orchestra was the orchestra for the Regal Theater. You familiar with the Regal? It's
Yeah.
like the Apollo in New York, right? So this trumpet player, what he would do is he would write out all my music because I wrote songs,
Yeah.
and he would write my music. And one day while I was there, now this is on the south side of Chicago. I'm about 11, 12 years old. Maybe 13. Okay. So this guy came to this gentleman's house while I was there. His name was Tommy Jameson.
Okay.
Tommy Jameson knocked on the door and interrupted him and I together. And so they were talking, and when it finished, just before they finished, I heard the gentleman that was doing my music, he said, well, this guy plays guitar. So my music teacher or instructor or writer came to me and said, this man would like to talk to you. And I said, fine. And when I went to talk to him, he asked me, would I play guitar for his wife?
Yeah.
I said, sure. He said, and he wrote down the address. He said, you come to this house, and at a certain time on a certain day, he wrote it all down. And I asked him, I said, well, who is your wife? And he said his wife was Betty Everett. I said, well, great, which I love Betty Everett because she sung with Jerry Butler, And by me being into the top 40 music, she was a big, big artist. You familiar with Betty Everett?
Yeah.
You too? Okay, good. Okay, good. So anyway, this is how I began on the music scene. I started playing for her, and it took a while. It took a year before she got another big record, which her last big record was There'll Come a Time. It sold almost 1 million copies. She almost received a gold record for this, okay? And this took us all over the world. Well, not only that, it made me one of the biggest guitar players in the city of Chicago.
Yeah.
Because she was the biggest artist at that time, right?
Ah, okay.
So after 10 years of being with her, I stopped. And this put me on the Chicago blues scene, the Chicago rhythm and blues scene. Once I stopped playing for her and entered into the clubs, then I took over the Chicago scene and played with Walter Jackson and the Shy Lights and Gene Chandler and Barbara Acklin and Otis LaVille and Otis Clay and everybody. I played with everybody.
Yeah.
Not as a hired gun, so to speak. Have gun will travel, have guitar will travel, and that's how I got on the scene of that. Now, in the interim of doing that, working with Betty Everett in the office building we worked in, which was located at 1321 Michigan Avenue. In the interim of working in this building, we were on the 7th floor.
Yeah.
On the 6th floor was Al Smith.
Oh, okay.
You familiar with Al Smith,
Yeah.
right? On the 3rd floor was Gene Chandler, Bamboo Records. So now, right? So Al Smith comes to me and says, would you work behind the scenes with Jimmy Reed? Perfect. So every time I would come in town from Betty Everett, I would go downstairs and work with Jimmy Reed. go downstairs and work with Gene Chandler. So I was running back and forth, up and down, in and out of town.
He's a good teacher, huh?
Yes, it was a great teacher. Yes, it really was. That was a great teacher. From me being there with this gentleman, and I'm saying this gentleman because I cannot remember his name. I'm almost sure that he's probably not with us now. But he was a great gentleman. You know, for him to offer me for this position, and for this position to yield so much.
Okay.
And it's still yielding because it yielded this book on Jimmy Reed, and I'm in the book for 3 pages.
Okay.
So it's really a great, yes, please. Yes. This is the book.
Yeah.
Sweet, yes. The great, yes,
Yeah.
There you go.
It's perfect.
It is a great book. And I don't know if you read English, but even if you don't, let's see here. Allow me to get in your hand there. And see there. Yes, and it just goes on and on and on. See, yeah, okay. All right, and it's a great book. So you're right. He was a great teacher, and from me being in his company, hiring him to do work for me, what he did for me was gave me a future. Okay. I acquired a future from being there. Yeah, and it's constantly paying off. After all these years, this is 40 years later, and it's still paying off. So it's great.
I said Jimmy Everett. Whoa!
It's great. It really
It's
is.
incredible. Alors, for you, what are your musical influences?
My influences in music. Well, I tell you, that question is to answer that question. It would have to go back and come forward. I would have to take you back and say, when I first started, my influences was rock and roll, which was Elvis Presley, Chuck Berry. It was filled with certain operas, Harry Belafonte, and as I grew up, my influences changed. I got into rhythm and blues, which consisted of Motown and VJ records. And then my influences changed again as I got into my early, or should I say, late teens, early 20s. I came to Wes Montgomery and Kenny Burrell and the jazz scene. But today, my influences, I am thoroughly influenced today by country music.
Good.
Because I am a writer of words.
Right.
And I am easily taken by a writer, whether or not...
Just a minute.
Yes.
Elle a bougé un peu la
Okay.
musique.
Whether or not, it's more than just music now. It is music and words. I could either be influenced by the music of a person, let's say Quincy Jones or Henry Mancini, or I could be influenced by a writer like Hal David, or just so many different writers, Tom Bell and Linda Creed, or there are so many writers, and it doesn't matter whether it's music or poetry or just something written. If it makes sense and it has a story, if what do they say? A picture says 1,000 words. Well, if a picture can say 1,000 words, then 2 or 3 words can paint you a picture.
Okay.
It goes one hand to the other.
I understand.
Yes, and if I can get a picture out of a few words, then they are great words. If I could say to you or to her,